Welcome to Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. I'm your host, Kim Todd. On Digging Deeper, we have in-depth discussions with experts about those important landscape topics. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on vegetable gardening with John Porter. Thank you for joining us once again for the first Digging Deeper of 2020 with Backyard Farmer. For our very first show this season, we're going to get those vegetable gardening tips from our resident expert, Nebraska Extension Educator John Porter. And John, you're a regular on the show anyway, and we haven't given you you're not the veg man or something, but you do really appreciate and do a lot with vegetables, correct?
Yeah, that's sort of my specialty. So I do urban agriculture. And so most of what I deal with is people wanting to grow fruits and vegetables at home or small scale farmers that are in the urban area. So that's my specialty and that's what I like. And early on in the season, we don't get a lot of those vegetable questions. We get more of those landscape questions. So I appreciate being able to talk about vegetables a little bit more. In
other words, I don't really have to make up questions for you about vegetables or give you things you can't answer, right?
No,
right.
I got most of it covered.
So in this particularly interesting spring that we're in, John, we're seeing a huge interest across the country for wanting to grow vegetables at home. And what are you going to suggest to start with that people do if they have absolutely never grown a vegetable before? What should they start with?
Well, that's a good question. And we see this happen anytime there's sort of like this emergency type of situation. It was kind of interesting. There was some research done back in 2009. The stock market collapsed. We went through this recession kind of thing. And home vegetable and fruit growing increased by 15 to 30% in 1 year. And that is because people want to be sure that they have the availability of food. So it's, okay, what if I go to the grocery store and they don't have what I want? I can grow it. Or what if we're unemployed or we don't have money? I can still have that access to food. And so that's why one of the reasons we're really interested in talking about growing fruits and vegetables now is because people are worried, and this is one of the tools that they can use to reduce that worry, but also provide food. That being said, people, they want to run out and they want to buy everything and grow everything, and that might not be the best option because, and this was a little piece of wisdom that was passed on to me, it's better to do a small garden well than a big garden not so well, because it will be more productive if you do well with a few plants than a large garden. So I would pick one or two things that you or your family would really like to eat and try those. Lots of people usually start with tomatoes. That's the number one. But I would say trying some of the leafy greens because number one, you can get them in a fast turnover. You can grow lots of them in a short amount of time. But also they typically tend to be easier, like the lettuce, or one of my favorites is Swiss chard. It's, I think, one of the easiest plants to grow. So there's definitely some ways to start out, and the easy ones are the ones that you're going to eat most likely.
Right, so the tips are you better like it if you're going to grow it.
Yeah.
And then you start with the easy things. So let's back up a little bit for leafy greens, because are they not also one of the vegetables that is a little bit cool season, since we're in kind of a early spring before Mother's Day right now?
Yeah, so a lot of those leafy greens are things that we'll want to plant early. So we could have planted them even earlier than this, but that would be a good place to start before it really gets hot, like after, sort of like middle to end of May. We probably don't want to get those things started, but we could do an early season version of those, especially things like lettuce. It's probably a little too late for spinach if we're looking like even in this first week of May, because we really have to have cold temperatures to get that to grow well. After it warms up, it's not going to do well. The amazing thing about Swiss chard, or with kale, some people like to, they like kale, is they actually are pretty heat tolerant. And they are biennial plants, meaning that they'll last through the garden, and if you could overwinter them with some protection, you might even have them next spring if they don't die out. So they're pretty hardy in terms of going through the heat.
Excellent. And, you know, leafy greens, when you're talking about a small garden, this much of a small garden is a lot of lettuce or Swiss chard. So it's not like a tomato that might take up half our socially distant table here right now, right?
Right. So when we're thinking about spacing, if you're starting small and garden wise, you know, we think about some of those spacings, and a tomato will take up, you know, at least like a 4 square foot area perhaps, to give it enough space. Whereas with a lettuce, you could look at maybe like 4 lettuce plants per square foot. Especially if it's the leaf type lettuce. If it's a head type, you'll need, you know, a little bit more space than that. But you can get way more of those things in. Now, if you're like, you know, the uber gardener, if you're like making the most of your space, you plant your tomato, and then in the area around it, you put some lettuce and let it grow until the tomato is ready to take over. And that's one way you can get in. You can cheat and get a few more crops in that one little space.
So John, you mentioned small garden, and then you mentioned tomato, and I recall that you had a rather interesting experience with 400 tomato plants.
That's true, and that's actually, you know, we're on par for that again this year. So we do what's called the All America Selections Trial Program, and we test them out at a farm in Omaha, and each year they send us all of these new tomatoes to try out. Well, they send us a lot of vegetables, but tomatoes are like by far the #1 crop that people grow and that plant breeders develop. And so we get all of these tomatoes to try. And last year we planted over 400 tomatoes in a plot. This year, I think we're going to do almost as many. And it's been a challenge because we're not supposed to be at work. We're not supposed to go to our office. We can't have a greenhouse. You know, we don't have all this stuff. So I might have done some socially distanced tomato starting on my front porch. On my front porch, we seeded probably about 400 tomatoes. And luckily, the city of Omaha is growing them for me in their greenhouse that they use for parks and rec. So I took them there. Actually went into the park, even though like it was blocked off. I had to sneak into the park for them to take them into their greenhouse, and I got out without getting arrested, so that was good.
And now they have them, and you will get them back at some point.
Yeah, and then we'll plant them at the farm, hopefully, if we're allowed to work at some point.
Right. Well, you know, the Backyard Farmer Garden, too, we have plants started in the greenhouse. They will go into the garden. Thank heavens that we have not put out everything that likes it warm, because it's not warm, and it's not going to be warm, especially the next couple, you know, we're in kind of a spell here where our good climatologists say, ooh, cool spring. So that may also affect people's ability to grow things and vegetables if they start too early. And I know talking to good garden center providers, they're running out of vegetable seeds. I know ordering online, they're running out. In the stores, they're running out. So from that standpoint, if people go on the hunt or they try to buy some of these plants or seeds online, any suggestions for them, or are they just going to have to throw up their hands and take what they can get?
Well, I don't know that we're at that point quite yet, but you are right. You know, I've heard it said that seeds are the new toilet paper. So many people are wanting to start gardening that there's garden centers are running out of seeds. A lot of them are still getting in the vegetable transplants, but you know, they're going quickly. They're going, I think, much more quickly now than they did in past years, that they're selling out quickly. And then the online sales, they're either, some of the companies are running out, or they've just gotten so many orders that it's really delayed shipping. And I know that's happened, and I've seen, like Johnny's seed is a big one that a lot of people order from, especially farmers. And now they're only taking orders from farmers. They stopped taking them from home gardeners. I think they're trying to do that again, but they really had to slow down that pipeline of orders. So just keep trying, keep looking around, find some of those local places, and you can be amazed where you find seeds. I mean, some grocery stores have seeds. I've seen them at some of our local grocery stores. You know, and the ones that you find at like the dollar store aren't the top quality seeds, but they'll do in a pinch.
Right, exactly. You know, one of the other concerns, and this is something we talk about on Backyard Farmer also, is people who are new to doing this. The enthusiasm starts out early, something comes up, grows, but they may not have any idea how to take care of it, especially if they're wanting to go through the entire season. So what's your advice on that, or what steps are we taking or you taking to make sure that people do understand how to actually prepare the soil, grow those vegetables, etc.?
Right, and so we have a lot of resources that are available through Nebraska Extension, some NEB guides or guides for that. And we're actually working on putting all those together in one place where we can sort of have like a vegetable gardening 101. But do that research and look for that information. And one thing that is helpful, I think, is when you're looking, like you can find anything online now and you don't know that it's 100% accurate. So always look to make sure that it's like a university or an extension. Even if it's a not Nebraska extension, you can find some from other states, especially look for states around us. They're typically very similar for that. But find a little bit of information. And, you know, it's apparent when some people start gardening that they don't really know exactly what's going on, you know, and sometimes the garden centers or the stores, you can't depend on what they're doing, because right now you can go and buy garlic, right?
Right.
You know, you go and they have those little displays and it has like the bag of potatoes and the bag of onion sets, and there's the garlic. It's the wrong time of year to plant garlic. You plant garlic in the fall.
Right.
Or you see these like, oh, here's the rhubarb and here's the asparagus. Well, those are things that, you know, you can plant in the garden, but they come back year after year. You might not want to put that in your vegetable garden. You might want to stick that somewhere else in the landscape where you don't have to work around it, because it's going to come back year after year. And the asparagus, so believe it or not, so here's asparagus from my garden. So there's, you know, as it comes up out of the ground, this is the asparagus you eat.
The purple variety.
The purple variety, yes, very tasty. But you know, after you stop harvesting it, you let it go down until it gets to about the size of a pencil. You can keep snapping it off until it gets down to a smaller size, and then you let it grow. It doesn't stay looking like this. It turns into this.
Right.
Right.
Very rapidly.
So very rapid, and this is like not even fully leafed out. It'll get much bigger and bushier than this, and you'll have like a whole big mass of this. So imagine like, you know, your asparagus plant is like this big around in the middle of your vegetable garden, and it spreads year after year, and it's going to be there for 30 to 50 years.
Right.
So you might not want to plant that in the row where you're going to plant your tomatoes and your peppers, because this will be there for a long time.
Exactly. And again, those are really good points, John. So we always recommend EDU or some .orgs, and certainly Backyard Farmer. You know, as we get more and more of those questions in, of course, we try to answer them, and it might be a light vegetable time right now, but we suspect that will change. So let's back up for just a second then on those tomatoes, and a little bit of a hint for people who really do want to plant them if they've bought the little plants. A little late to start your own seed unless you're waiting until way after the 4th of July for that first tomato. What are you going to tell people about their first experience with getting that tomato plant into their space and then producing those tomatoes?
Right, and you're exactly right. So, you know, at this point, we can sort of start planting them in the next week or so. You know, we're looking for the frost date, and for eastern Nebraska, that's supposed to be, like Omaha, supposed to be May 4th, their last frost date, and that is at 32 degrees. I don't think we'll get to 32, so I don't think technically we're going to actually quote frost.
Right.
But we're getting down, if we get below like 37 to 36, we can get some damage on those plants. So it's not planting them too early, or also waiting. So, you know, I took the frost date to gospel, so I do have my row cover, because the tomatoes and the peppers are in the garden already. But I knew to do that. That's one thing. If you see that frost coming or the cold temperatures, you have to cover them to protect them. But you can plant, you don't have to plant them in the first week of May. You can usually plant tomatoes up through June and maybe even into July. So if you still wanted to start seeds, you could, and you can plant those. And it's actually good to space things throughout the season. So you don't have to plant everything at once. I think that's one thing that a lot of people get overwhelmed with. Like, I've got to plant everything that, Mother's Day, and then all of the stuff comes, harvestable at the same time, and now I've got like 25 pounds of tomatoes that I don't know what I'm going to do with. So space it out throughout the garden. Another thing is tomatoes is one of the only things that you can actually plant deeper than everything else, because most of the other stuff you want to plant it right where the root attaches to the stem. Tomatoes, they grow roots all along the stem, so your tomatoes will be healthier and stronger if you bury them deeper. So bury them up to almost like the first set of leaves, and that will help you get a little bit more of a successful start.
Well, and also if you think about wind events, if you've got, little tiny tomato plant, if you get one in one of the little cells, it's got that many roots and then it's in the garden for a week and here comes 50 miles an hour, or it's in for enough time to be as tall as you are, it goes over if it doesn't have those roots. So again, some of those tips on how to actually get things established. And of course, what people are going to be wondering too as we move through the season is, what about those pests? What about the diseases? What are the steps they can take to be able to mitigate that or live with it? And that ends up being a whole series all by itself, or Backyard Farmer questions, or questions to all of our good extension people.
Right, and you can go, so if you go to YouTube on Backyard Farmer, our channel, all last year, I did a series on tomatoes, and that's the #1 crop, so you can go find those. And it talks about preventing some of those problems or being ready for them, but always watching Backyard Farmer, because we get all of those tomato questions all year long. But being ready to take care of some of those issues is key. There will be issues, but having multiple plants helps you deal with that, because then if that one doesn't make it, you've at least got some insurance, a backup.
Exactly, and even if your children, for everybody who is having schooling at home, even if your kids don't like tomatoes, chances are they're going to like those little bitty cherry ones or the grapes, because they're so much fun to pick.
Oh yeah.
So that's really great, John. And that is unfortunately all the time we have for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. We'll be back next week for another discussion about gardening topics that matter to you. And be sure, of course, to watch Backyard Farmer live every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central on NET. Thanks for digging deeper with Backyard Farmer.